Hello, I'm Velma Wright. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Velma Wright. I run an online lifestyle magazine. It's called The Wright Report. In your program, the report part may not have a W in front of it. It should. I am spell check for that. I didn't do that though. But I started The Wright Report about 6 months after I left the New York Times News Service, where I was an editor. I was laid off. Was quite happy to go, but I wanted to go on my own terms. I didn't want to be laid off, and I was actually looking for something else to do that would allow me to have more of my time. I'd spent about 6 years in France, and I had grown accustomed to freelancing and sort of being my own boss, and I didn't like the idea of working in an office anymore. And I wasn't working glamorous hours. We're talking 5 to 11, 6 to 12, 7 to 1, that kind of thing. People think the New York Times, but you know, when you're getting home at 1 and 2, it just doesn't seem glamorous to you. I mean, it was a wonderful work environment, but I just wanted something else. And I was laid off before I got to whatever that was. I would, as I said, I started my website. It's a blog. I don't call it a blog. I call it an online lifestyle musezine, our website. And one thing I will say, jumping forward, is those of you who are thinking about starting your own product, becoming sort of an entrepreneurial journalist, it is very important to stick to your brand. You decide who you are. You brand yourself. Whenever someone calls my website a blog, I call it a website. I correct them immediately because it's important that people, you know, get on board with your best practices, because if you don't define yourself, others will define you. But at any rate, one thing I did, which I know a lot of people don't have the luxury of doing or don't have the comfort level of doing, is I took several months off. I was so happy to be free. The last thing I wanted after I left the news service was to work. So I just had fun. You know, I live in Manhattan, so I just had a jolly old time. And I don't regret that. I was essentially living off my savings and investments. I don't have much of that now, but my point of view is that it's only money. And I think it's also important to say that as well for anyone who's laid off and you're thinking about going out on your own. And I believe at this juncture in your careers, and I'm looking out without my reading glasses, but I think most people are maybe a little bit beyond the millennial age. But if you are over 30, over 40, over 50, even over 60, I think this is an opportunity for you to ask yourself, what do I really want to do? What do I really like? What am I really passionate about? And go for that. And if you have to work on the side, and I do work on the side to keep the roof, because my site isn't generating income, and part of the reason it's not generating income is because I haven't tried to monetize it. That will come in the future. It's been a 5-year curve. There's been a lot I've learned. I've had a lot of experiences, good, some of them bad, but I don't regret my decision. I'm a print journalist. I started in the 90s. I went straight from the University of Missouri into the Dallas Times-Herald, hated it. And then I moved to Greater Boston, where I spent a while at the Patriot Ledger, loved it. And the beauty of being in that small shop in Greater Boston is that I got to do a lot. I got to be a reporter, an assigning editor, and I was also a copy editor. At some point, I needed to make a life change, and I moved to France. I lived there for 6 years. I worked for a number of people. I also lived off my investments, but I edited books for UNESCO, and also did editing at the International Herald Tribune. Moved back to the States, to DC for about 10 minutes, worked in the Watergate complex, which I like to tell people, and then I moved to New York, worked for the Post, and worked for a couple of legal publications, and then by hook or crook got on at the Times, had lunch with a colleague of mine from Massachusetts, and he says, "Oh, so are you looking for work?" And I said, "Yeah." And a few months later, I was at the Times. Again, it was a good experience, but I wanted to leave it, not when I did. But you know, I found my way, and I'm in progress. I'm a work in progress. So I'm looking forward to answering any questions that you might have about someone who has not achieved a fait accompli. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Satullo.
I've experienced sudden ejection from a newsroom that I loved twice in my life. 2008 from the Philadelphia Inquirer, where I was editorial page editor, then last year at WHYY in Philadelphia Public Radio and TV, where I was vice president of news and civic dialogue. As I look back at those two times, in retrospect, they were
Want to try this? Apparently this is the magical mic because this is the only one working well. There you go.
Thank you. So, two bits of advice from those experiences. One would be, as has been said, this is an opportunity really to think about what matters most to you. In both those cases, my wife and I decided that it was more important to us to stay in Philadelphia than it was for me to stay in journalism. Which sort of clarifies things a little bit. So you're not just hunting a job anywhere, you're looking for a job in a particular place that you love, that has meaning for you, that works for your family. I was lucky enough after the Inquirer to find the job at WHYY, but then confronted the same circumstance last year, and I realized that one of the biggest pieces of working capital that I had was the relationships and sort of the network of people who knew me and trusted me that I built up over the 30 years of doing journalism in Philadelphia. And that was the most valuable thing I had going forward. And to leave that to chase a job in another city really didn't make much sense. I mentioned my wife, who was a journalist for a long time. In fact, I met her because she was sitting at the next desk on the first day of my first newspaper job in Easton, PA, a very long time ago. But the reason I bring her up is she made a decision about 20 years ago to change careers. I always joke that she did a very thorough study and found the only job where you could get a master's degree and still get paid less than a journalist. She's a social worker. But when she graduated from Bryn Mawr Social Work School, she got a job at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. The reason I bring this up is when she got there, she discovered that the skills she'd learned as a journalist served her in tremendous stead and put her ahead of many of her colleagues who came from different backgrounds. What does a social worker at a children's hospital do? They interview families. They sit in on conversations between medical staff and families, and then they write a report called the chart notes, the psychosocial chart notes that go in the medical chart of people. And in other words, they interview, they listen, they analyze, they condense, and they write. She does that so much better than her colleagues who just have straight social work training that she's like a god who walks the hallways at Children's Hospital because she can write, right? And she knows how to interview. So my point is, when you think about what your skills are, don't think I write stories for newspapers. You have skills as an interviewer. You can do research quicker than, you're in the 99.9 percentile of all human beings for speed of seeking out, verifying, and analyzing information. And you can write simple declarative sentences in English, which puts you in the 99th percentile of all Americans, particularly as I am now a corporate consultant often in corporate America. So you too can be gods who walk the earth in hallways that you never thought you would ever walk down, if you just understand. Now, all of us who work in journalism are used to having our skills richly undervalued by the people who employ us, right? So we don't really understand how rare the skill set of a great newspaper reporter or radio producer or TV journalist are. So that's one thing. Don't undervalue yourself because the people you just work for kicked you in the teeth. Have an understanding of really how valuable your skills are. The other thing I would say, I'm now working as that mysterious beast known as a consultant. I have clients in journalism, I have clients in corporate America as an executive coach, and I do a lot of civic engagement consulting. Have about 10 different gigs I'm working on. So two things. Every morning, make a list. Make a really good list. Because you really need to, when you're running your own life, you really need to think about what you need to do every day. And there's always if I don't make a list, there's always 6 phone calls I should have made that I forget to make. The other thing is, if you're working for yourself and working from home, identify all the really good coffee places with good Wi-Fi. Because you need to get out of the house every once in a while. I've sort of worked out a rota in my neighborhood of this is the place I go when I need to write something. This is the place I go when I just want to plow through the New York Times and other newspapers, and this is the place I go to when I'm doing email. So I just sort of, it's Pavlovian, you know, whatever the task is, I know which place I want to go to. You can, at least if you're like me, and most of us have ADD and sort of wanderlust anyhow, you can't just sit in your living room in your office all day long and work. You have to be conscious and sort of plotting out, I'm going to go here to do this and go here to do that. It makes you more productive. This is really a good mic.
You good. They clap for you.
Yeah. You're making me feel bad. I'm a broadcast professional, and you're using it.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Mooney with now the nonprofit news site NJ Spotlight, and I see many, many friends here, and so this is a great treat to see my old pals from the Bergen Record and the Star Ledger to join us today. My quick story, a few of you know it, but I worked at the Bergen Record through much of the 90s and then moved to the Star Ledger around 2000, 99. Back in the days when newsrooms were growing, and in 2008, after everything sort of collapsed at the Ledger and they sort of misread the market, they laid off or they bought out, and that's always an interesting term, is whether you're bought out or you're laid off. Either way, you're leaving because you don't really want to. But they bought out half the newsroom, and it was close to 200 people. And to be honest with you, it was voluntary, and the sense was, at least in my life, it was a bigger risk to stay than to leave. And so I left at midnight in 2008. One of the things that few of you will remember is when you left, in the beginning when people left, they'd get a standing ovation from the newsroom. And that happened, and by the time I left, it was like, you're gone, We don't, there's nobody clapping for me. And then I went for 6 months, worked with the New York Times on their New Jersey desk, their New Jersey section, which they then promptly closed, which gave me further insecurities that everywhere I go, downsizes. And sort of floated around and wanted to be a teacher, and ordered my college transcript and saw that I didn't do very well in college and I probably wouldn't be a very good hire as a teacher. And fortunately connected, and a bunch of you will know him, Dusty McNichol, who I had worked with at both the Bergen Record and Star Ledger and the New York Times. We had followed each other, and Dusty had the notion of creating basically a State House News Bureau, and a website that would cover very specific issues. And I had covered education for 20 years in New Jersey. He had covered public finance and politics. And he had the notion of creating what he initially called State Paper of Tomorrow, New Jersey Spot. And we bounced that off a couple of mini focus groups, i.e. our families, who thought that was a horrible name for a news site. And it got extended out to be New Jersey Spotlight. And we were, basically went around talking to folks about whether this was of value. And we fortunately hit at the same time that a lot of foundations and nonprofit groups were lamenting, as they are now, the demise of journalism or of analytical, in-depth journalism. And there was the beginning of some money flowing from foundations into nonprofit news. Much like, obviously WNYC and public television and the rest, there wasn't a whole lot of nonprofit news on the print side. And so we were able to garner some funding, some seed funding from first the Community Foundation of New Jersey in Morristown, and then the Knight Foundation out of Miami. And we launched with 4 of us. Dusty was not part of that, and God bless him, he passed away, unfortunately, a few years back. But we started, myself and 2 others from New Jersey Print Media and 1 publisher from the former Business Week. And we gave it a go and we launched in May of 2010 and have slowly, that was 6 years ago, have slowly grown to now 12 of us in all, half of them journalists. That we have 6 reporters and 2 editors, and another 4 people doing everything from marketing to sales and the rest. About $1 million business per se, still predominantly funded by foundations, but we also have about a third of our funding comes from events, sponsorships, similar to these types of events where we're able to get sponsors to give us $5,000, $10,000 to put on an event. Some advertising, not terribly lucrative, but not as bad as people think. Actually, it's been surprising. This year is really our best growth area. And then most recently, we started raising money through memberships. And folks who will give us $35 and up become part of the New Jersey Spotlight family, and where we will be doing events, we'll be sharing insights. We're sort of figuring that out as we go, but also finding itself to be a good, I wouldn't say lucrative, but certainly a steady and maybe more stable income than foundations. Really, we're trying to move away from the reliance on foundation funding. And it's been a wild ride. I started as a reporter at Spotlight covering education, doing what I'd always done. As somebody else said, a lot of it was starting out on your reputation, your own brand, who you are. That meant a lot more than NJ Spotlight when we started. It was, when we started, it was John Mooney and Tom Johnson's thing. There was no name. It was them just continuing to do writing. And that was really important. I hate the term brand because it, obviously has its connotations of being so marketing and corporate centered, but you are each a brand. You each have a value. The more unique that value is, certainly the more attractive you are as somebody who not just will hire. I think another point I want to raise is, and I've talked to you about this, is making partnerships. Finding others who you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. And start your own website and start your own news site like we did. It's finding your niche in potentially somebody else's organization. Now, what has happened over my 6 years is I was writing every day and still running the thing. As more and more business pressure grew, as we got bigger, I had to do more fundraising, had to run the business side of it more. So now I'm in a virtually full-time fundraising role. So any of you who have really fat checks, I'm sure I can find a place for them. But it's been fascinating, and I will readily say, and I've said this, and I'm sincere with it, is in 30 years, 35 years of journalism, I'm having more fun now than I've ever had. Now I'm lucky; it's because it's worked out pretty well, and the site has garnered some attention, and we continue to grow, but. There's a sense now where I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop. There's a sense now where I dictate my own, fate, or at least have some influence in it. And it's really has been a highlight of my career. And I've worked with some great folks over the years. And that's not to denigrate any of those times, but those days where we miss the newsroom. That, as we all know, that newsroom doesn't really exist anymore. And there was some, the camaraderie was wonderful, but it's just a different place now. And my last piece of advice is adding to Chris's notion of coffee shops. I also have spent a lot of time in rest stops on the New Jersey Turnpike, and I will say right now, for all the right reasons, yes. And I will say the Val Kilmer rest stop is probably the best Wi-Fi in New Jersey. So. But I'm happy to talk more about it. It's fascinating. It's got some risks. There's certainly a lot of folks who've had some tougher times than we have, and I'm sure, knock on wood, that we have some tougher times ahead as well. But there's lots of possibilities out there, and you have to make it. Best Wi-Fi in New Jersey. Best Wi-Fi in New Jersey.
So my name's Mike Rispoli. I'm the journalism campaign director for Free Press, which is a national nonprofit advocacy group that fights for the public's right to connect and communicate. And I am also a recovering journalist. I was a State House reporter for Gannett back during the Corzine administration, and was a victim to the huge Gannett slaughter in 2008 when they laid off a few hundred folks in New Jersey and they decimated the State House Bureau. I was in a really unique position because all of my colleagues, and some of them are actually here today, like I got that job right out of college, and I was very idealistic, which gets killed very quickly when you work in the State House. But I was very idealistic, and I just remember thinking, like, well, like what am I going to do now? And I was lucky because I didn't have a family to feed. Like, I was young, and so I'm sure a lot of people had feelings of like I don't know what to do now. And what I decided to do was to figure out a way that I could use my skills as an investigator, as a researcher, as a storyteller to make a difference in the world that I was living in. If I wasn't going to do it through journalism, I wanted to do it through something else. And so after, again, I got a job at the Ledger for a year, just to like make sure I was making the right decision. And I wound up going back to school, where I learned a lot of different things. I studied the cross-section between social progress and media and things like that. But what I really learned at school was really interesting, which helps me now, is I learned how to use Photoshop, how to shoot video, how to do pictures, how to like code, how to do all these different things. And you don't have to go to school to learn those things. But when I left and I want to figure out what I want to do, I basically just made myself available to anyone. And so like I freelanced for a while. I went to NGOs and nonprofits who had really terrible blogs, and I said, like, I will just write for your blog for free and like help you like develop storytelling and how to promote your issue and things like that. And I wound up getting, I wound up working in human rights for a while, but I was interested in like how do we like actually tell the stories of human rights activists? And so I wound up working for this group called Access, where I did public campaigns for a while. I worked with the media there. And so Access is they're a digital rights organization that promotes freedom of expression on the internet. So I was in this unique place where I could speak from the journalist perspective, but I was also being an advocate at the same time. And for me, that positioned me well because I could speak in two different languages, which helps me a lot right now because through my work, I do community organizing, but community organizing to support journalism. And so I can walk into a newsroom and understand the pressures that they're feeling. I can understand, the difficulties that they're having with fewer staff. But I can also speak from the community perspective because I'm in there, I'm talking to people every day, and I know or I try to understand better and listen to what the needs are of the community. And so I say all that because for me, I was fortunate that it happened very early in my career. But I still had to I had to go through the same thought process that a lot of people up here did, which was like, well, what do I do now and what do I feel passionate about? And for me I want to be able to use the power of storytelling to make a difference. And so I just bounced around from job to job to job until I landed on one that I'm at now, which is both media and journalism, but also advocacy. And so I feel very fortunate to be where I'm at now. And I think, I don't know if I'm like in a position to give advice, but I'm certainly in a position to commiserate, which I think is like a lot of what we're here to do today, which is good. But I think to be really creative in thinking about what you're really good at and how that not just applies to journalism or just PR, but like every single industry. Like what's every single industry needs people that writes well, which is what we were talking about. A lot of industries need to research, to tell stories, to either sell something or to get someone to do something or whatever it may be. And that's the power that we all have, is that we're really good writers, we're really good storytellers, we're really good researchers. And so if you find something that you care a lot about, think about how you can bring your skill set to then advance whatever you want to, whatever cause you want to work on. So I'm just really happy to be here too. So I also really would love to hear everyone else's stories too. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody. So I'd like to turn it over to folks in the audience who have questions or anything that they would like to add. Whoever wants to start, just raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you. Anybody? Al? All right.
Thank you. I'm usually the troublemaker in the room anyway. Ms. Wright, I agree with you in terms of websites. And in essence, I said troublemaker. In essence, reinventing oneself. There is life after journalism. one thing is this working? Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. As long as you can hear me, Bob. One thing I realized about myself, I've been a journalist for over 40 years. Most importantly, being a journalist, I was a writer. And the skills that I developed as a journalist, I wanted to, are the tools that aid me now. I'm now a novelist. I just launched my author's website. And it's not, I do have a blog a part of it, but it's the website that really counts. But it's the tools that we use as writers that we need to put forward, and that's how I'm moving forward with life after layoffs, and having survived 2 layoffs at 2 different newspapers, as a couple of you folks know. You start to question after a layoff your values, not your values, but your sense of worth. I know that after I was laid off the first time, I had to sit back and think to myself, well, what is it that you want out of life? I knew that I wanted to write, and now was the time to do it, and that's what I've moved forward with in terms of moving on after a layoff. But the hardest part was sitting back and reevaluating yourself, and knowing that journalism and writing were the keys to move forward. So, anyone else?
Other questions, stories to share? Yeah.
This is a question for John, but anybody can answer it. I mean, for people who are just leaving jobs in the mainstream media, how can they go about making money right away? I mean, your site, if you could talk a little bit about the ways in which you monetize your site and sustain yourself, that would be helpful.
I mean, there's, and it doesn't work for everyone out there in terms of their interests. There certainly is nonprofit money out there. There's, and I'm not saying that's for everybody, but there are. If you are interested in doing writing, for civic causes, whatever they might be, and it might be, running a blog for a foundation. It might be, Citizens Campaign. There's any number of organizations that need writers out there, and there's a lot of attention out there towards, quality writing. I think, that is the one skill set that everyone in this room has, and it really does matter. And I see a lot of resumes, and trust me, it's a premium skill. So that was, and in the beginning, that was the fastest money. I mean, of all things, I laugh at that now because foundations are so not the fastest money now. It is, such a slog to get money out of them. But that was, you could get, a decent sum fairly quickly. They'll write you a check, if you pass muster with what they want to do. The other things we had to build, and it was none of them really, I mean, all of them predicated on our journalism, but where we've made our earned income was around events, and getting sponsors and ads for those, which is, I mean, one can argue those, and I certainly argue all the time that it's a form of live journalism. But again, you can make, there are corporations out there that want to have events and want a journalist or somebody with our skill sets. And again, as Chris said, we have many skill sets. They want us to be running these things. And if you have a background with events, there's certainly a space for that, for journalists. And I've learned it, and it's been, we raise close to $250,000 a year for sponsorships of events. And, it took us a while to get there, but it's some real money.
Events like what, John?
What's that?
What kind of events?
We have done a variety. We started with doing small single topic panels on anything from solar energy to charter schools to those kinds of things, and we were able to find unions and organizations, a lot of them nonprofit, who were willing to sponsor those. We have grown. Our big thing now is we have annually an event in Newark called New Jersey Spotlight on Cities, which focuses on urban issues. It's a day-long conference, and for that, half of our annual sponsorship money comes from that. But that's 50 or so speakers, 250 attendees, NJPAC. It's fairly high cost as well. But it's, there is certainly a market for that. But, the one area I don't think, certainly not starting out where you're selling your content itself online. It's just very difficult to get folks. You really need to build your brand. Somebody, or Mike was talking about, working for free, giving out your stuff for free just to get that byline, just to get that exposure. I've really, even in 6 years, I really say no to, I don't say no to anybody. We can't really afford to. Just continue. Early mantra was make a new friend every day. And it really is important. It may not even get you a click. We run a lot of our stories in the print edition of the Philly Inquirer. We don't get a single click out of that. But I met, the chief of staff of the mayor of Camden. I said, "Do you know who NJ Spotlight is?" And she goes, "You guys are the ones who write for the Philly Inquirer." And I'm like, okay, but that is part of your, as they say, brand. And these are all things that ultimately do then draw attention and potentially draw income for you.
In terms of quick money, if any of you were beat reporters and are back to that idea of brand, if you were in New Jersey or in your city, were the subject area expert in the media, think of all the organizations that you covered. All of them hold events, right? And they have panel discussions, and they need a moderator. Now, this is not big money, but you were talking about quick money. The going rate for that, moderating a panel, is about $500. So if you do one of those a month, that's $500. That's like what you were going to get from unemployment. So you've doubled your income that way. And that's a way of keeping your name out there, keeping your brand going, associated as a subject matter expert on something. One of the questions you sort of have to ask is, do I want to at some point go back to being a journalist in a newsroom or in some sort of established news organization? If the answer is no, there are more opportunities for writing. Or if you're not too worried about it. I had an offer across my desk that I wasn't interested in last week, but I was writing a corporate report, $20,000 for 2 months' work. It was not something I was interested in doing, and that's something at that moment in time I had time to do. But that's the kind of money corporations will pay for somebody who can write $20,000 for 2 months' work. And it was not full-time work. It was just a 2-month cycle for that project, and you were going to get $20,000.
And I just add, also foundations and nonprofits all have to do annual reports. And there's a big market for that. I found I was really bad at it. And I think they spiked everything I did, but they did still pay me. So, there's a real market for it. It's a different kind of writing. It's, you're cheerleading. But it's certainly, a potential also, again, to keep your name out there and to be working with an organization that you hopefully admire.
They're calling for the indictment of the CEO of the foundation, John.
Yeah, it's a little different.
Yeah, I would just add to that, keep in mind networking. Like being here is part of that. Everyone you've heard this before, but I'll just remind you, everyone is a contact. So that means your friends, your family, everyone, because they may know people at these organizations. Because at the end of the day, most of us get work through someone we know. So how do you get that $20,000 2-month writing gig? You probably have to know someone. So it's very important to let everyone that you're looking for work and what you're looking for. And I would also say, I think it's very important to write without getting paid, but you want to curate. And that's the word we should all put in our dictionaries, curate, because we're at the point now where you have to curate just about every segment of our lives, and you don't want to write for anybody. There are certain people that you're willing to write for without getting paid, because you don't want to have yourself doing a lot of work for which you're not getting paid, because you need to generate income. But certainly some work would be in order. But make sure it's some place you'd like to see your byline, some place you respect as well.
Yeah, I made a little list of things to talk about today, and the very first one on my list was networking. And I know it's something we've all heard our whole lives. And when I was first running my own business as a part-time venture, people more experienced would tell me, you have to network. And I thought, oh, I don't have time to network. if you do run your own business, a huge chunk of your time is to marketing, especially if you're a solopreneur. You're going to devote equal time to working and marketing to get new business. So I joined a business networking group in the county where I live with really not very high expectations that anyone in the group would hire me to do video productions or help me get TV work. But it turned out to be fantastic because not only did I meet people that I could hire when I needed certain work done, whether it would be landscaping work or a certain attorney. I found my business attorney through my networking group. It also took quite a while before, because video production work tends to be more expensive than writing an article, and it took a while for me to find the people in the group who had the size company that could use a video, and also for them to build up trust, because it really comes down to people hire you when they trust you and if they like you. So in the networking group I'm in, we have lunch together twice a month, and it did take some time, but I got a lot of work out of that group, and also just developed friendships with people. And now I don't even consider it networking. I just like to talk to people. I talk to strangers all the time. It's very embarrassing to my teenage daughter that I will talk to the people behind me in the grocery store. And I just like talking to people, and I have gotten, I can't tell you how many jobs just from talking to people, complete strangers. They ask what you do, you tell them, oh, well, so-and-so needs such and such. And I'm going to tell you a story that just happened about 2 weeks ago. I'm probably going to get a job in the end of this year or the beginning of next year working for a major television network because I happened to be in the hot tub at my gym. I'm not kidding. And there was a cameraman in the hot tub. We started talking about, what do you do? What do you do? I mean, this guy was a cameraman for a big television network. And he said, oh, we need a producer who does exactly what you do. And he's expecting me to get a call the end of the year, the beginning of next year. It really does work. It just takes a lot of time and a lot of patience. And
I think one thing, too, is not only do we have all these skills as journalists, but we also have the perspective of what news is and how to make something newsworthy. And before I started doing this for Free Press, I kind of did this on the side, but I did a lot of media training workshops with nonprofits and local activist groups and things like that, just because they don't know how to write a press release or how to get in touch with a journalist or how to dress for when they're on air, or how to speak into a microphone, or how to, I mean, like, they don't know what on the record or off the record, they don't know any of these things, and so we have the perspective of journalists knowing all those things, and it's something that you can run trainings for, you can do like freelance consulting for something, you could help, take like a research report and kind of spin it into something that's more digestible by the media and all these different things. So you can also think about your perspectives from being inside the newsroom and how you can transfer that to other organizations.
I have a story. Is that okay?
Excellent.
All right.
Sure.
My name's Jackie, and I own a site called Tap Into Westfield. Do you guys know about Tap Into? I met Mike Shapiro about 5 years ago. I was freelancing, and I was having just a terrible time making money as a journalist, and I was taking like whatever writing work I could get, and I just wasn't really happy with it. And it took him a year, but he convinced me to franchise Tap Into Westfield. I'm making money as a journalist, and I'm making good money as a journalist, and I really love it. So if anybody is interested in finding out about that, talk to me. But you do not have to give up on journalism. I think we're going to keep it alive.
I might add, Mike Shapiro is the man who started Tap Into is over there. So a man well worth knowing.
Question in the back. And for those of you who have come in a little late, feel free to head over and grab lunch too.
Hi, my name's Dave. I'm a media broker. And what do? I match folks up, mostly with community newspapers, folks like you, Probably 80% of the folks that I work with are laid-off journalists, folks that have been in the media for a long time who want to do their own thing. Community newspapers are very strong right now. A lot of my clients are coming off record years, not necessarily in this market, but all around the country. And frankly, they're available for sale. One of the things I tell folks is don't believe what we read in the newspapers about our industry. We are our own worst enemies. The community newspaper business right now, the weeklies, the group weeklies, the small dailies, are frankly doing very, very well. And in fact, are increasing in value exponentially. I wouldn't touch a major metro daily with a 10-foot pole. But the size of the newspapers, the small weeklies, the community weeklies, the groups are doing quite well. And folks like you, I could name folks who you probably know, are now have their own, they're their own boss. They are working, they've stayed in the media. They have their own community newspapers and having a blast, an absolute blast. I would take your skill set, and I am a former news editor, newspaper publisher. I've done this for 40 years. I started my first newspaper when I was 26 years old, which is about 2 years ago. But, no. But seriously, it's very strong. Don't look at New Jersey alone. I work with a lot of folks down in the Southeast. We go all around the country, frankly. But I'm based right here in Sparta. I work out of the house. I put together a group of papers up in Sussex County, so I'm very familiar with this market and what you guys do. But I've got to give you this message, that there's a lot of very good things happening in our industry right now. And it's something, just want to plant a seed. It's something to think about. It's not for everyone. It's the type of job that you roll up your sleeves. It is a lifestyle. It is not a job. And you literally become involved with your community and you build your product. I've got one that I'm closing on tomorrow. We have a buyer and a seller. Fellow came out of Connecticut. He originally bought the paper about a little over 6 years ago. He bought it for under $200,000 down in the southeastern market. Tomorrow we're going to sell it for $1.2 million. It can be done and still can be done. Here if you want to talk.
Thank you. Thank you. Simon?
So this is a networking question. So building a network is great, but then at some point you have to monetize your network. And how do you do that? How do you go to someone you've built a relationship with, a professional relationship with, and say, oh, well, can you start paying me now?
Well, networking for me was getting to know people and telling them what I do. I do television and video production. You got up at every meeting and talked about, I do television and video production. So the people you were having lunch with, there were people, business people from all different kinds of businesses. And eventually somebody would need a video done, or somebody, what ended up also happening was I did some independent documentaries and I needed to fundraise for them. So then your networking circle can sometimes help you with funding for your projects. But are you a laid-off reporter?
No, I'm
a grad student. But the network is just making relationships with people, developing trust, and helping people when they need help. And then when people know you're looking for work of some kind, people like to return a favor. So my networking wasn't about doing work for free for people and then saying, now I want to be paid. It was more getting to know people and getting to have them trust you. And then when they needed my services, they would hire me. And also your network has a network. So it's not just the 60 people in the room at the lunch. It's who do they know. So it's just keeping people informed about what kind of work you're looking for and having them hire you when they're ready.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I would just add, like, last fall, when I was looking for work, I called, Gene's smiling. I had a peculiar situation because, not to put too fine a point on it, I was fired, and I was fired somewhat controversially. and it ended up being on the front page of the Inquirer. Now that's a great way to get work. So if you can get a front page story about you being unemployed, I highly recommend that. But you know, a lot of people called me. I was calling a lot of people, and particularly people, you know, who ran things. The first minute of the conversation was always awkward, but at the first minute I would work with the fact, look, I'm not looking for a job. And you could just hear the sigh of relief. But then the question was, is there anything you're working on I could help you with? And most of the time, there was something people were working on. Sometimes it was just, as Cindy said, it was free advice, it was coffee or lunch. They pick your brain a little bit. But you do that with a certain amount of generosity, and it does come back to you eventually. So people... And my wife was always yelling at me, why are you giving away advice for free? Because they'll come back, you know, if your advice is good and proves out. And that pretty much is what happens if you're in a situation where you don't immediately need a job to support your family. I'm lucky. My wife has a job, good benefits. I didn't have to worry about health care. So I was very lucky in that sense. But the key thing was I wasn't calling people and saying, what can you do for me? I was saying, is there anything you've got cooking that I could help you with? And the answer was almost always yes.
That's a very important point, but I want to really break down networking for you. It's just essentially communicating with people. You know, you're having a conversation. You know, you're finding out about each other, and you can ask for something almost immediately. Just today, I was speaking with the woman, Susan. She's gone now. She's with some outfit in New Jersey that wants to have news about opera or some such. And she needs a video editor for something. And I said, oh, I know someone. I met her like 12 minutes before. So it can be that. So this is a networking event. You know, you introduce yourself to people and you tell them who you are. You find out who they are. You know, they may have something you need. You know, you may have something they need. But this gentleman made a very important point. When you are doing a more formal networking, it really is better to ask, what can I do to help you, rather than trying to figure out what someone else can give you. Because most people don't ask, what can I do to help you? You know, and you can do unintentional networking. I got on at the New York Times News Service because I was just catching up with a colleague of mine. I was new in the city. I had only been back in the country a year and a half, and I was just trying to reconnect to my network. And we were out to lunch. And he goes, again, are you looking for a job? It can be as simple as that.
Two very cliche, and you probably know these, but you know, I guess that have ring true in terms of my own fundraising, and is the one obviously is when you're looking for money, ask for advice, and when you're looking for advice, ask for money. And the other one though is people invest in people. They don't invest in necessarily the cause. If they believe in you and you've built through that relationship that you're good at what you do, that is going to carry more weight, as much, or at least as much weight as what you do.
One other thing I was going to mention earlier, I hoped you could talk a little bit more. A lot of folks in the room have been recently displaced, recently as in the last month or so. And some of the folks watching on the live stream too, not only from Gannett and the Record, but I've also heard from quite a few folks who have left the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, other places like that. Could you talk more about those first few weeks when you leave the newsroom and you wake up and you don't go back to the newsroom, and what that feels like and how you start to develop your days after that?
Well, I can talk about NJN, which was a television station, television network that had been on the air for about 40 years. And the good part for us, if there was one, is that it was a very long time in coming. We had heard talks of different administrations in New Jersey wanting to shut down NJN for a very, very long time. So it certainly wasn't a surprise, at least it wasn't a surprise to me when NJN closed. But, and I was only working there as a contract worker part-time when it happened, so it wasn't quite as harsh for me. But certainly there's just a sense of the loss of your family. It's your family when you work in a newsroom and you're together all the time and you have all that stress and all those long hours and all the hard work and sweat and tears that go into it. So it's definitely a loss of family. And that's, we're going to say it a bunch of times, I'm sure. That's where unfortunately, we're back to networking. I think the most important thing to do is to not stay at home and look online for jobs too much. I don't think that's the best way to find a job. It's to get out. It's to join a nonprofit board. It's to be at social events as much as you can. It's to, yes, sometimes volunteer your services, not too much, but sometimes. I want to just say one more thing before I pass the mic on to someone else. In that networking group I was talking about, you may find that people will constantly ask you, can you do this for nothing? And I'm not a big fan of saying yes to that. I do a lot of work pro bono on my own terms. A lot of times there's something that I want to cover anyway, I want to report on anyway, I want to produce a video about anyway, and so I will do something. But and that often leads, without me trying to make it lead to something good, it often does lead to other opportunities. But as far as the business networking group I was in, I had an opportunity to do a couple of short videos that promoted that group or promoted the work of that group. And it was from the group seeing the work I did for the group that led other people within the group to hire me. I don't know if that makes sense, but you're doing work pro bono because you want to, and you don't have to necessarily have ulterior motives, but I would try to stay away from doing work for nothing because people ask you to do it. It should be something that you care so much about and you're so passionate about that you just want to do it because you want to do it.
I would say, and this is extremely important, take at least 2 weeks off and do nothing. This is me time. This is the time for you to be me, whomever you are. You need the time to get over the shock, hurt, whatever. You need time to regenerate. So it's a time to maybe go to whatever it is you wanted to do as a tourist, wherever you live. Go do that. Don't network, not directly. Just chill out, enjoy yourself, regenerate, because during that period, it may feel like you're doing nothing and wasting your time, but your mind and your body are resting. Your mind and your body are becoming more creative. And these are ideas that can lead you to what you really want. And everything else you've heard about networking, do that starting week 3. But those first 2 weeks, me time. Me comes first, because me can't do anything for anyone else unless me is in a good place, physically, psychologically.
Mike, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I was in a very opposite situation from NJN, where I found out the day before I was about to get laid off, and it was only because I saw my editor, who looked like a bomb just went off, or like his cat died or something. Like, he just looked so upset. I didn't know what was wrong, and I was the last one to leave the office. And so I asked him, and he said, "Don't tell anyone, but you and everyone else in Gannett's about to get laid off tomorrow." And so I had to walk into work the next day, like, holding that. That was really weird. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare, and I remember like, just watching a lot of TLC and, like, Say Yes to the Dress and, like, what not to wear, and, like, go into this, like, shame spiral of this, like what am I gonna do? But if you do, just to really echo that, what was just said, like, if you do have the luxury to take some time off, because that was when I really centered myself and thought, okay, well, I don't want to find myself in this situation again. Not everyone has that luxury, but I had some time to think, well, if I don't want this to happen again, then what can I do to prevent this from happening? How can I position myself to either find a field or a job or learn something to make this less likely to happen? And so I think after you kind of have that shame spiral, after you've watched all the TLC shows that you need to, just like really just think about like where you want to go, and with that too, also really think about, if you do want to pursue media, if you do want to continuously pursue that, to think about like what are the needs in some immediate areas that you can fill. So and so that's kind of how I came up with the path that I had, was that, well, I want to make a difference in the world. people need to know how to talk to the media and how to tell stories, and so how do I get a job that lets me do that? And then I just bounced around from job to job until I found that.
Just quickly, I concur with everything that was said. You do need to take some time to sort of clear the mechanism. One other thing that you may call it networking, but it's not exactly for the same purpose. Do you know anybody who's wise? Do you know anybody who the way they live their life you admire?
You.
Yeah. Go to lunch with them and just talk, what you're trying to do is figure out what it is you really want to do next. And it's hard to sort through all the wreckage and the underbrush. So, I did that one time, and a person said something to me, and, it sounds like one of those, you listen to grasshopper kind of things, but it really helped me. She said, I don't want to hear about what you want to be doing in 5 years. I want to hear who you want to be in 5 years. It's not about what you're doing, it's who you want to be. And don't do anything right now that's going to prevent you from being who you want to be in 5 years. I thought that was great advice. So find somebody wise, your aunt, your grandma, the friend down the street, whoever it is who you really admire how they live their life, and just talk. Just say, I'm going through this, and take in what they say back.
So I'd like to say thank you to the panel. Give them a round of applause. Thank you. And now we're going to switch over to the photojournalist panel. So if we could have our photojournalist panels come up. And while we are switching, one thing I want to point out is that in everyone's, I'm getting too close to the other microphone, and in everyone's folders, there's a sheet about Pointer. Remember, we are offering free training through Pointer and the Center for Cooperative Media. And this is supported by the Dodge and the Knight Foundation. So we've talked a lot about freelancing today. We've talked about networking. There are certificates and webinars and courses for those sorts of things. So please make sure that you check out the Pointer sheet and go on our website. If you want the codes, if you do decide you'd like to do a training, you'll just email me and I'll get those to you.